It was only a few weeks ago on a Friday afternoon when I was meeting a very good old friend of mine, and we went for a walk on Hampstead Heath. Hampstead Heath, for those of you who don't know London, is a very beautiful green space in North London. And we were at the top of Hampstead Heath, and there was a beautiful double rainbow. And at just that moment, my friend Nigel Savage, who made Aliyah to Israel and lives in Jerusalem, made Aliyah just before the high holidays, called me. And it was minutes before Shabbat came in Jerusalem. And we were chatting, and I said, I'm really trying to get to Israel. I don't know how to do it. And he said, I'm going to send you the details. There's a mission. It starts on Monday. If you can get a flight from London on Sunday, there's one place left. You should join us. I'll send you the details. Shabbat Shalom. So I said Shabbat Shalom, went back to looking at the rainbow, my friend, and went home to my mother's flat and looked at the email and looked at the itinerary and said, I have to go. By that time, all of the El Al offices, and El Al, as you probably know, is the only airline right now flying to Israel. The El Al offices in London were closed. The El Al offices in Israel were closed because it was already Shabbat. So I went online, and in my haste, I just bought a one-way ticket to Israel for Sunday night. So then Shabbat came in. My mother, my sister, my cousin and her husband, and some very good friends came over, and I said, I'm going to Israel on Sunday night. And they all said, oi. But it felt so right. And as I flew and landed, actually no, before I flew, so already my friends in my community in London had already heard that I was going. And right after Shabbat, I got a call from someone in my community who said, do you have extra room in your bags? And I said, I haven't packed yet, I don't know. And they said, our nephew is in a unit and they are desperate for the following items, and we have them all, but we were trying to mail them, and if you can take them, that would be great. So Sunday morning I went over to their house, took the various objects, filled a whole suitcase, then filled a suitcase, another suitcase with mobile battery packs, which are very important in the field, with energy bars, with various other things that I'd been asked to take, and checked in 2 bags that had very little of my stuff in them. And then when I was at Heathrow Airport, there was a group of people. Earlier in the day, I had been to a warehouse, a business that had turned into a warehouse that is purely collecting things, mostly for Chayalim, for soldiers, but also for other places in the country that just desperately need supplies. And I ended up taking from there some toiletries, some duct tape, and gave a donation to that organization. And then when I got to Heathrow Airport, some of the people from that organization were there checking in 27 suitcases, absolutely full of stuff. So I helped check some of them in, and then when I landed in Ben Gurion, I stayed until I was helping them identify the bags and getting the bags off, and then we helped get them through customs, and then they were sent to various army bases throughout the country. That's how my entry into Israel started. What do you pack when you go to Israel at a time like this, apart from stuff for other people? Very little. But then I was thinking about all the people I was going to see, my people, my loved ones, my close friends, my cousins. And we spoke to my cousin's father, and he said, chocolate is always a good idea. So my mother and my sister and I went and bought a lot of chocolate. That was also in the suitcase. I also bought a lot of Rescue Remedy pastels. And everyone I saw in Israel, I gave Rescue Remedy to. Rescue Remedy is a flower essence remedy that is supposed to calm down your nervous system, available in liquid form or pastel form. Look, the point is, having not been to Israel for a very long time, I landed there to find an utterly changed, transformed and traumatized country. Every single person that I met was feeling the trauma. And what does that really mean to feel that kind of trauma? There's a book that was published just a couple of weeks ago by Rabbi Menachem Creditor. Some of you will know Menachem Creditor because he the Olam Chesed Yibaneh Yalalai Lai Lai Yalalai Lai. He wrote that melody based on the verse from Psalms in 2011 as a promise to his children that the world will be better. He's now, in very quick time, edited a book of poetry and readings called Am Yisrael Chai, that is really a response to the war that is happening in Israel and Gaza right now. And one of the things that really struck me in this book was written by a psychologist about the nature of trauma. And I just want to read a little section from it because it feels like that's the country that I found. PTSD, post-traumatic growth, increases personal strength, connection to others, and insightful philosophical or spiritual changes. There is no way to go through this thing unchanged. The potential transformative power of suffering has been known for thousands of years, and PTG is well researched. It's necessary to find ways to be resilient in these times, otherwise secondary losses to you can be additionally devastating. Toxic stress is literally poisonous. It triggers an endocrine and autoimmune cascade of negative effects and perpetuates rage, hypervigilance, absence of joy, restlessness, difficulty relaxing, digesting food and sleeping, and the replaying of re-traumatizing memories. It goes on, but the point of that essay being included in this book is to recognize that we're all traumatized right now. Certainly everyone in Israel is traumatized. I think all Jewish people everywhere in the world are traumatized right now. I'm feeling it. I'm sure many of you. Some of those symptoms, I'm feeling them. I'm not eating well. I'm not sleeping well. I feel very anxious a lot of the time. So the question is, what do we do with that? And what are the triggers? Many of us have different triggers. You know, I don't believe for a minute that we have the same opinions and beliefs about the nature of this war and what's going to happen and what should happen and what will be in the future. But I hope on this Shabbat that has been declared by various organizations, including ADL, as a Shabbat of Achdut, a Shabbat of unity. Even if we don't agree with each other, we can at least agree to be unified, to be brothers and sisters in this moment. Because we read a Parsha where we read about this enmity that starts in the womb. We read in the Torah portion about Ishmael in the last weeks and about Esav. Esav is also called Edom, and Edom, according to the rabbis, became the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire became Christianity. Ishmael, we know, is the father of Islam. Christianity, Judaism, Islam are all descendants of the children of Abraham, and we're fighting, and it's painful. And we're fighting among ourselves, and that's painful. So on a Shabbat of unity, the importance of being together, and it's so good to see so many of you here, the importance of being together and what that might mean. When I was in Israel a few times, I actually got away with being there for a whole week and not once hearing a siren, unlike all my friends and family members in Tel Aviv who hear sirens about 3 times a week. In Tel Aviv, you may know you have 1.5 minutes to get to shelter. A lot of people have mamadim, which is a safe room in their houses. Some people have a miklat, which is more like a shelter in the basement. And the siren goes off and you have 1.5 minutes to get there. And they go off regularly. And if you're down in the south, where I was, as some of you know, I was on Kibbutz Be'eri, and there you have 15 seconds. From when the siren goes, you have 15 seconds to find shelter. And that's been going on for decades. Rockets have been coming from Hamas for decades into the region. And so people are already traumatized just by the fact that those sirens go off multiple times a week. And yes, we have an Iron Dome defense system and they blow up in the sky. So even though I didn't hear a siren twice when I was in Tel Aviv, I heard and saw this, what looked like a fireworks display, where 2 missiles were intercepted by the Iron Dome and the whole sky is lit up. When I got back to England, it was just after November the 5th. November the 5th, you may know, in England is fireworks night. And it was also just a few days before Diwali, which is the Hindu festival of light, where in London there are lots of firework displays. So I got back to London and there were fireworks going off all the time. And I felt it like a kind of secondary trauma for myself, because hearing an explosion when you're in Israel, and when we were on Kibbutz Be'eri, we heard rockets, we heard Israeli air shells firing all the time. We were wearing bulletproof vests and we were wearing helmets, but I didn't want to go into that today. What I want to talk about is just the theme of Achdut, of togetherness, of unification, of unity, and a little bit about how, if we're in a sense of trauma, how we move towards healing based on some of what we read and didn't read in this week's Parsha. So I want to talk to you about a young man. I guess he was probably late 20s or early 30s. His name is Adir Schwartz. And Adir Schwartz was one of the leaders in the Hitorarut movement, which is the protest movement that's been going on for many, many months in Israel before the war started. And he has been, along with other activists, central in organizing the protests, which were typically every Motzei Shabbat, every Saturday night in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, in other cities around the country. And he now is one of the absolute leaders in the Hamal, as they call it. Hamal stands for Cheder Milchama, the war room, but it's not a war room. It's a volunteer organization that is getting the stuff where it needs to go right now. And so in the center of Jerusalem, there is a 5-story acting studio that has been absolutely transferred into an emergency command center. On every floor, there are boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff that's been donated. Some of it from overseas, some of it from people within Israel. There are 200,000 Israelis who are displaced right now, many from the north, many from the south. A lot of the people in the south are in the hotels in the Dead Sea. Many of the people in the north are in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And in fact, the hotel I was staying with, some of you have heard me say this already, our group were the only people who were not displaced Israelis who were staying in that hotel. And so there's an enormous need to get supplies to where they're going. So what's amazing about this is that all of these people whose whole energy for months and months and months have been to protest the government and the attempts at judicial reform that Bibi Netanyahu was promoting. And overnight, it was shifted into this massive operation nationwide that is Achdut at its highest, right? Because you've got people from the far left and people from the far right. You've got religious people and secular people who are all joining together to say, we all need to show up right now. And the organizational structures that were in place for the protest movement were immediately changed to being about mobilizing volunteers to get stuff where it needed to go. And it was remarkable. We went there, we met Adir Schwartz, we went to the acting studio, we spent a couple of hours volunteering, just packing up boxes. We were given big boxes and a list, and we had to go around and find the things and put them in the box, and then they were shipped to wherever they needed to be shipped. And these were all requests that had come in from various families. So there's just something very powerful about seeing a nation that is traumatized, a nation that is war, a nation where every single person knows somebody, at the very least, who knows somebody. At the very least, there's 1 to 2 degrees of separation. Either people know someone who's being held hostage, someone knows, of course, everybody knows people who are serving in the IDF. I will never, ever forget sitting, and I've written about this and you've probably heard it, but when I was sitting with my good friend Rebecca in Tel Aviv on her roof eating breakfast after a swim in the Mediterranean, and we're really enjoying reconnecting, and then this text comes in from her daughter saying, I'm going in, no phone, I love you. Those words are imprinted on me forever. The trauma of a parent who's getting a text message like that, knowing exactly what it meant. At that particular time, her wonderful daughter, Shaya, is a combat paramedic, so she's one of the few women who actually go into the front lines, and so she, I believe, is back in Gaza right now. She went in and came out and now is back in again. So all of these experiences that I had, and I have no intention of getting political, because I'm not there yet. I'm still in my own kind of trauma from what I saw and what I experienced and what I witnessed. But there is this amazing sense of achdut, of people coming together, and I hope we can also come together in the different ways, whether we're action to support hostages, supporting people that we know who are in the IDF and people that we don't know who are in the IDF right now. Isaac is a very interesting character, to say the least, Yitzchak. And Isaac is someone who, like everybody in Israel and perhaps like all of us, is traumatized. And we see in different ways the way that trauma plays out in his own story. There is a conspicuous absence of Isaac after the Akedah. He's not even described in the binding of Isaac's story. when Abraham, the story starts, Abraham and his son Isaac climbed up the mountain, Mount Moriah. When Abraham leaves, he's with his Na'arim, his young attendants, but Isaac's not there. So where is Isaac? Where does he go from that point on? And one of the stories that's so powerful from last week's Parsha is when Abraham sends off his servant, Eliezer, to go and find a wife for Yitzchak. Where's Yitzchak? He's not involved in that conversation. He's not around at all. Where's he? He goes to a well called Be'er L'chai Ro'i. Be'er L'chai Ro'i, which literally means a well of a living God who sees me. That's where he goes. He goes to that well, and that well arguably has been named in the Torah by Hagar, who was banished by Sarah and Abraham with her son Ishmael. And she goes to that well and she thinks they're going to die of thirst, and then that well appears before them, like it's been there all the time, but she hadn't noticed it. And she names the well, this well of a living God who sees me. Isaac goes to that same place, this well of a living God who sees me. And according to the Midrash, he goes there because he says to himself, how can it be fair that my father's getting a wife for me and my mother's dead and he doesn't have a wife? And the Midrash says he went there to go and get Hagar, to find Hagar and bring her back so that he and Abraham can get back together. And Hagar's name is changed traditionally to Keturah and becomes Abraham's second wife after Sarah dies. But there's something about that well that I've been thinking so much about a well of water whose name means a well of the living God who sees me. And then, if you cut to this week's Parsha, we've seen all of this digging of wells and digging of wells. Isaac, who's, as I said, been kind of absent, we don't hear his voice at all. And then suddenly, here he is, re-digging the wells that his father dug, that have been blocked up by the Plishtim, by the Philistines. These wells that have been blocked up, these wells, he starts digging them. And the first one is called Esek, which means like it was a really hard situation, but they reopened that well. And then there was a well called that he named Sitna, because there was enmity between his people and between the people of Geraz. They tried to work together to open this well. And then the third well produced Mayim Chaim, living water. And that well he named Rechovot, which means a place of expansiveness. Rabbi Shefer Gold talks about the openings of these wells in a very powerful way. She says, we dig the well of Rechovot, spaciousness. The well of our ancestors becomes a fountain connecting the dark depths of our human story with the wide skies of awareness. Even at this time, where life feels very frightening and unstable and scary and people are traumatized, there is a way in which we can dig those wells. Those wells represent our ancestors. They represent our tradition. They represent spiritual life. Mayim Chaim, living water, is what we need to nourish our souls. We need Shabbat. We need to be together. We need to sing and celebrate even when life feels really hard. These are things that we absolutely need. We need to hug each other and hold each other. We need to feel the connection of brothers and sisters, even if we don't agree on the same ideas. And my rabbi, whose first name is Jonathan, but not Jonathan Sachs, has written a new book. And so I might be changing the Jonathan that I quote every week. But he says about Be'er L'chai Ro'i, the well of a living God who sees me. He says when we say the traditional greeting to mourners, the traditional greeting that we say to mourners is Hamakom yinachem etchem b'toch sha'a avelim. Hamakom means the place, but it's one of the names we say for God. So literally, when we say that, we're saying, may God grant you comfort among all of the other mourners. Jonathan Wittenberg writes that when I say that to a mourner, I'm saying, may you find that place inside you where there is a living God who sees you. Like be'ech l'chai ro'i. So this idea that we are so traumatized, and as that piece that I read, trauma can bring up like horrific reactions. It can be toxic, it can be very painful. But like if in our trauma we're able to connect to the wells of our ancestors, if we're able to connect to spiritual tradition and practice in a way that we connect to a source of living water that somehow is able to see me in my pain, in my grief, in my mourning, in my sadness, in my joy, in my connection, in my loneliness, to see me, who sees me for who I am with all of it. And if we can be in a community where we can see each other, then I think there is the possibility of healing and moving on from this horrific time that we're living through. Every single person that I encountered when I was in Israel said, thank you. I had real resistance. Once I found this mission, I was clear that that's how I wanted to go. But when I was first thinking about going to Israel, I was thinking like, Israel is traumatized right now. Am I just going to be a burden? Am I just going to be someone else that a devastated country feels they need to take care of right now? But no, that was not the experience. Every single person hugged me, appreciated the gifts of chocolate and Rescue Remedy, and said, thank you so much for coming. And when we sat with Rachel Goldberg and with John Polin, the parents of Hirsch Polin Goldberg, who is the 23-year-old hostage in Gaza, we don't know if he's alive or dead. We know that he left a bunker after having escaped from the Supernova Music Festival with one arm missing from a grenade and was hurled into a pickup truck by Hamas terrorists and taken into Gaza. And his parents, who some of you will have seen because she gave a fantastic speech at the UN, she spoke in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday. We spent a couple of hours with them, with John and Rachel in Jerusalem. She said, I feel like I'm walking around the world without a heart right now. The anguish and the pain. But what she also said was, every single text message, every single phone call, every single email that I get from people I know and love or people I don't know at all has meant the world to us. This sense of feeling that people are not alone and not abandoned, that we remember them, that we think of them, that we love them, is really so important. Can't underestimate it. And in a sense, our connecting to other people maybe is a way of us saying, I want to hold your hand and take you to Be'er L'chai Ro'i. I want to take your hand and take you to a well of living water where there is a living God who sees you in your pain and in your anguish and in your devastation right now. So I was a witness to some of the most unbearable things I've ever seen in my life, and I'm not going to talk about them on Shabbat, and maybe I've already said too much, because I know for some people Shabbat is this important island where we kind of transcend the brutal reality of the world. But I feel, for whatever reason I went to Israel, I have an obligation to speak and to tell what I saw, because it is horrifying and frightening to me, the reaction to what happened on October 7th. It is horrifying to me, having seen what I saw, that there are people who are saying that it never happened. There are already people saying that it was staged by the Israelis. There are already people who are saying that those hostages aren't real. I mean, when I've spent time with parents of those hostages, when I've seen the sites where massacres happened, it's like the outrageousness that there are people, and in my view it is blatant anti-Semitism, who are saying that is just unconscionable. And so those of us who have been there and have seen it, I think now have a very somber obligation to speak it out, to speak the truth. Because this was an attempted genocide, and we survived it. So I say again, we need to dig the wells. we need to dig the wells, because in one of those stories, the digging of the well and the water that came out of that well actually enabled a peace treaty to be made. So it's not just about digging wells to nourish our own spiritual beings, which I think is really important. There's also a way in which that living water, Mayim Chayim, is also something that can perhaps, in a world that feels kind of hopeless in some ways, help restore our sense of hope. That maybe if we really keep looking for those wells, if we keep digging those wells, if we keep bringing new living water into the world, maybe there will be the possibility of peace and reconciliation. Maybe the descendants of Ishmael and of Yaakov and of Esav can actually stop being enemies and become friends. And maybe, like Lauren said, blessings are not finite, and that there really can be beautiful flowing blessings from parents to children across cultures and religions and nations, and that it can bring healing and it can bring peace, and that we can all find ourselves holding each other and standing in front of Be'er L'chai Ro'i, a well of living water, of a living God who sees me. Amen.